This is Uncle Cardboard's Limited Jamboree. I'm your host, Jake Brown, aka Uncle Cardboard, and today I've got your latest episode of 5 Up, 5 Down. This is where theme music would usually go, but we have no time for that because today we are looking at 50 cards instead of the usual 10. That's right, I'm going to cover every archetype and then we're going to see what's up, what's not doing so great since opening weekend. If you're new to the show, I look at the 17lands.com data for game in hand win rate. That's basically if the card was ever drawn, and we see how that changes on a week-to-week basis. Since Crimson Vow is so fresh, we're just going to be looking at the digital release date, so November 11th through the 14th as the first set of data, and then the 15th through the 21st as the second set. Also, since this is 50 cards and things are so brand new, I'm going to try and whip through this as fast as possible. I think that some of this data is a little misleading. Other bits are really important, but at the end of the day, we're not going to spend a ton of time breaking down all these cards. Next week is going to be a really key show because we're going to see what was noise and what is regression, where we stand a little bit better. If you're unsure about which cards are which, you can find a link to watch along on YouTube in the episode description, or you can tune in every Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/Uncle Cardboard, and then you can jump in the live Q&A afterwards. If you have any questions, I'll cover them, and we'll talk about, we can go more in depth on any of this. Okay, on to our first color pair, and it's Azorius, and clocking in number 5. With a 3.5% increase in game in hand win rate is Repository Scab. And this is easily, in my opinion, the best exploit common, and you're happy to sack some of your disturbed creatures like Lantern Bearer on turn 5 or turn 6 when you have a spell to get back. You're not usually curving right into this, but this was, our 5th highest riser in Azorius. Number 4, up 3.6% is Traveling Minister, and I think the secret's out on this card. It might regress a tad bit, but I think people know Traveling Minister is good. Number 3, up 4% is Evolving Wilds. Now, there are a lot of double white and blue casting cost cards that you want to get out early, like Catilda, Dream Shackle Geist, Voice of the Blessed, and Faithbound Judge, but don't stress about getting an Evolving Wilds. You'll be fine without one. Number 2, up 4.1% is Vampire Slayer. I think this might be a little bit of noise, but good 2-drops are hard to find in blue in general, so this might just be indicative of wanting an early body that you can throw a Disturb Aura on. And then up number 1, our biggest riser, up 5.2%, Nebelgast Beguiler. This has been like a pet card of mine, so I love to see it. It's still not a great card, and it has a terrible IWD or improvement when drawn number, but I just have my eye on this as a potential Wishcoin crab of this set. Let's get to the downs. Number 5, down 0.6%, is Serpentine Ambush, a card I don't think anybody's broken yet. Even if 5/5 feels like a lot in this set, but I don't think you have to be like, oh god, I have to rethink everything about Serpentine Ambush. Number 4, down 0.7%, is Wretched Throng. This is nothing I'm too surprised about, as it wears Disturb Auras pretty awkwardly. And overall, I think the data has a hard time figuring out these like die and go fetch more cards, so we'll see. 3, down 0.8%, is Chill the Grave. Tells me that we're looking at more of a tempo deck than a value deck. More of a value deck than a tempo deck in Azorius. So, but again, 0.8's pretty low. Down 3.3% in our number 2 slot, and that's significant, is Piercing Light. That makes sense to me. I think Azorius in general is happy to make early trades and then get value out of disturbed cards later, as opposed to wasting a card to deal with cheap threats. You should be having an early board presence and trading creatures, not casting Piercing Light. And then number 1, down 4.2%, is Unholy Officiant. And I think this is probably just pure regression. There were some people that were probably getting lucky being aggressive or more aggressive than their opponents were good, if that makes sense. This deck just tends to be so mana hungry with everything that you're doing with Disturb that you're not just sitting around going, oh, I'll spend 5 mana to put a 1/1 counter on something. Up next, we're going to go to Boros. And for our ups, number 5, up 4.3%. Sigarda's Imprisonment, a card which I think we're all happier to play than we initially might have thought we were. Exiling is important text. Getting a blood token in white is very rad. And in general, I think Exploit just wasn't as good as everybody thought. So you don't mind slapping Sigarda's imprisonment on things. Number 4, up 4.4%. Falcon Wrath Celebrants. And this is a card I think I've talked about ad nauseum at this point, and we're only a week and a half in. But it's your ideal curve topper at common. And I think that you're playing this at 5 and then probably just never playing another land after that, which feels great in Boros. You're just low curve, and then you're pitching every land that you see, because you're probably going to generate a little bit more incidental blood, and you're cycling through lands to hit other, hopefully non-land things. Number 3, up 5.3% is Parish Blade Trainee, which is somewhat of a surprise to me, but I just think this is a middling common. This, might have just had like a really rough opening weekend. In general, I think this gets better with the more haste that you have, but haste isn't something that's readily available. Otherwise, you're stuck trying to get value out of it on turn 4, which feels bad. Number 2, up 6.3% is Ceremonial Knife. And Boros plays well with knives without even a ton of blood synergies. A lot of the times it just helps make a creature irrelevant later or can help train, even though I think you don't care much about training. This also probably has to do with the fact that Ceremonial Knife had a garbage win rate initially, as people were just like throwing it in everywhere. But this is, again, archetype specific to Boros. So we're just seeing, hey, Knife has a home here. And then up number 1, up 10.2%, which is massive, is Ancestral Anger, which I think really speaks to how aggressive Boros decks want to be. If you're looking at what does this deck do, it doesn't mess around. It casts Ancestral Anger, and hopefully in multiples. So you're trying to get in chunks of damage from unexpected angles with this deck, and just making sure that your opponent really never knows where they stand in the game. Just a quick note, this didn't seem right, so I went and checked the data, and Ancestral Anger is the 3rd worst common in Boros, so I think this is just a case of a card really underperforming and then coming back up to being still really bad, but not the worst thing that's ever been cast in Magic. So don't play Ancestral Anger, play aggressive Boros decks. Honorable mention to the 57 wedding invitations that were played last week for a 54% game in hand win rate. Not like great, but that's comparable to Drogskull Infantry and Heron of Hope. So not bad, and definitely a card I'm going to keep my eye on. For our downs in Boros, at 5, down 1.4%, Fearful Villager. And this is a surprise to me, as I think that Menace tends to play well in VOW, especially if you're doing cheap combat trick stuff. But I'm guessing that you're just rarely flipping into Knight. You're just trying to cast in Boros. And Villager really wants to be that 4/4 to shine at Knight, unironically. Number 4, down 1.5%, is Heron Blessed Geist, which makes sense because you're not really doing that much enchanting, so you're not cashing in on that token, and you should really have better options at the top of your curve. You want those Celebrants. You don't want a 3/3 flyer that might become a couple 1/1s. Number 2, down 1.9%. Number 3, down 1.7%, is Lacerate Flesh. And I have been harping on cheap interaction being super important, and Flesh is just the perfect example of a card that you're not looking to cast. I would say that you would rather use a Sure Strike to take down a big blocker and then another cheap creature. You're looking to make their inefficient removal worse by playing efficient tricks and then making them waste 4 to 6 mana on a Grizzly, 4 mana on a Bleed Dry, 6 mana on a Grizzly Ritual, on a, 3 drop, that they're spending too much to answer. Number 2, down 1.9%, is Unholy Officiant. And again, I don't think that this is the one drop that this deck wants. You're not looking to amass a bunch of lands and then pump this thing up. You want to dump your lands to random blood tokens. Number 1, down 2.8%, is Vampire Slayers. This is Vampire Slayer going down again. And so something to take note of. At this point, I'm less inclined to think it's noise and more just that we're learning that Vampire Slayer might not be a great card, even if you're hurting for 2 drops. And this is a deck that really wants to curve out. Next up, we have Dimir, and this one gets weird because Dimir just like massively overperformed in the opening weekend. So everything got worse except for Serpentine Ambush and Steelclad Spirit, which I certainly don't consider hallmarks of a successful Dimir deck right now. Because there was that massive regression, we're just going to cover the cards that regressed, and we'll start with number 5, which is down 3.1%, and that's Aim for the Head. I guess they're not too concerned about the mirror, considering that overperforming, but in general, just Aim for the Head, not too exciting. I think that discard plays better in sealed than draft. Number 4, down 3.3%, is Courier Bat. And technically, Courier Bat is tied with Adamant Will here, but we're just not going to cover Adamant Will if you promise that you're not putting Adamant Will into your Dimir decks. Deal? Deal. Great. So Courier Bat, I just don't think that there's a lot of synergy in Dimir for it, and that if you're gaining little bits of life, you're probably building Dimir incorrectly. We've seen that you want to be focusing on exploit synergies and keeping it pretty linear. Number 3, down 4%, is Dreadlight Monstrosity. It's just kind of a big do-nothing curve topper that you don't need. If you're getting into the late game with Dimir, you should be efficiently answering your opponent's threats. And having a bunch of your own, too. This is a deck that really thrives off of getting value in incremental value by exploiting. So late game is the perfect game for a Dimir deck. Number 2, down 4.6%, is Blood Crazed Socialite, which I was kind of surprised by. I just don't think Blood's very good in Dimir. Again, keep it streamlined, keep it linear. And then number 1, down 4.7%, is Cradle of Safety. And this probably just speaks to that you don't really care if your creatures die. I mean, you're an exploit deck for Pete's sake. Why did I just say Pete's sake? What am I, 90? But really, you're not trying to protect your creatures as much as sacrifice them for value and hopefully just land a big bomb or get up enough on cards where you're pulling ahead and your opponent's just having trouble re-upping themselves. Next, Golgari on our upside, number 5, up 1.9%, Moldgraph Millipede. And I think that Golgari might be the secret self-mill deck. It's kind of doing what you usually want to do, but the self-mill cards tend to be playing way better in Golgari than they are in Simic, so something to note. Number 4, up 2.1%, is Unhallowed Phalanx, and I don't like the Butts deck, but that's definitely something to note. Maybe it's playing better defensively as people try and be more aggressive. I know that there are a lot of people that are high on Rakdos, so Phalanx is pretty much undeal-withable there. Undeal-withable is what a turn of phrase there. But I don't know. I'm not all in on Phalanx off of its number 4 placing on this list. Number 3, up 3.3%, is Pointed Discussion, again showing us that these 3-mana draw 2s and gain blood are better than we had thought initially coming in after Midnight Hunt, where those were more on the unplayable side. Next, we have in the 2 slot, up 4.3%, Sheltering Bows. And I'll just note number 1, up 4.4%, is Nature's Embrace. So here we have a pair of 3 mana value enchantments that don't really do a whole lot, and you need creatures down for them to be relevant. With Bows, I could see that being a nod to Butts being better than we thought. Nature's Embrace, perhaps they're trying to splash. I don't know. It feels bad. But you generally are casting more expensive cards in Golgari, so perhaps Embrace is a nod to that. On the downside, down number 5, down 2.4%, Dawnheart Disciple. And this just doesn't surprise me. You're not doing many human things, and I don't think that you really just need a 2/2 that can chump. It has a pretty decent early game. Number 4, down 2.9%, is Snarling Wolf. This is the one deck that I thought might want a Snarling Wolf. Snarling Wolf might have also been a little bit of an overperformer initially. People were, at the Church of the Tiny Wolf, and I think it's just kind of crashing back down a little bit. Number 3, down an even 3%, is Undying Malice. I think this is just due to the fact that there aren't a ton of great ETBs in Golgari where you're going to be able to get your maximum value for Malice. Number 2, down 3.7%, is Honored Heirloom. Again, not a really powerful ability in that, exiling, and you're probably running Nature's Embrace over Honored Heirloom if you need something to help you ramp. And number 1, down 5%, Rural Recruit, which I guess makes sense. If Undying Malice isn't good, then why would Rural Recruit be good? But just Rural Recruit isn't what this deck is trying to do at all, and kind of a bummer because I think people are pretty high on Recruit coming in. Up next, we have Gruul, and Gruul wound up pretty similar to Dimir in that it just crushed the opening weekend. The biggest improvement was Mulch, and that was because it had a 39% win rate, so it really had nowhere to go but up. Nature's Embrace went up 2.6%, but it's still not very good, so let's just get to the downs. Number 5, down 3.1%, we have Flame Blessed Bolt. And it really had nowhere to go but down from its absurd 60.2% win rate. So we're not harshing Flame Blessed Bolt at all. It's still a great card, and you'll play just about as many as you can get your hands on. Number 4, down 3.4%, is Sheltering Bows, which really shouldn't be in Gruul, and we would expect it to regress. Number 3, down 3.5%, is Kessig Flame Breather. Again, there's not a red-green spells deck. Stop trying to make red-green spells a thing. Number 2, down 4.6%, is Snarling Wolf. And I'll also just note that number 1, down 6.1%, is Voldaren Epicure. So what I'm seeing here is that Gruul doesn't really care about a super aggressive start. It wants solid creatures that are going to scale well with the game. You're looking to play Wolf synergies onto, whether it's the 2/1 that gets a bonus. There's just a bunch of really solid 2-mana wolves, and I think that's where you would rather be. But just make sure to note that Snarling Wolf definitely is coming back down. All right, on to Izzet. On the upside, number 5, up 1.8%. We have Skywarp, Scob, and Fear of Death. They're kind of tied there. And combined with number 4, which is up 2.5% at Dreadlight Monstrosity, you might think that this deck wants to have a longer game. And I want to kind of cover the rest of the data because at the end of the day, I don't know if I'm buying this yet. Fear of Death, maybe if you're pretty evasive, but in general, you're not getting value out of self-mill with Fear of Death and Izzet. So what are we doing here? Number 3, that's up 3.3%, is Serpentine Ambush. And this is one that I almost buy because the most aggressive decks where you're running Lantern Bearers and Voldaren Epicures doesn't mind making them a 5/5 sometimes as a cool trick, or sometimes just getting in for lethal with a 5/5 Flying Bear. So I'm keeping my eye on it. I still am very suspect, but you never know. Number 2, up 5.7%, which is notable, is Cradle of Safety. And when you look at Cradle of Safety, it's a cheap thing that's going to save one of your early beaters from overcosted removal, and then you just get to crack back. There's nothing worse than when they tap out for a Grisly Ritual and you're sorry, you don't even get the blood tokens, and I'm probably going to kill you next turn. It's cheap, it's interesting. And then the number 1 thing that tells me that is it skewing aggressive is up 7.4%, as the number 1 most improved was Bloody Betrayal. And I get that Bloody Betrayal is just one of those cards that data has a hard time interpreting, because if you're casting Bloody Betrayal, you're probably winning the game. You're not just Bloody Betrayaling and then just conceding. It tends to be something that closes out. So I don't think that it's your ideal finisher, but something to note. Maybe you want one of these and you're excited to have a blood, but I don't know. In terms of down for Izzet, number 5, down 2%, is Blood Petal Celebrant. And the data really hates Blood Petal Celebrant in this deck for some reason. I'm not sure why. I don't think it's particularly bad, and you need to get your 2-drops from somewhere, but something to note. Number 4, down 2%, is Selhoff and Tumor, which makes all of the sense in the world. It's more of a defensive play, and you're not trying to entomber. You're not getting value out of your graveyard. This isn't spells matter in the traditional sense. You're not pitching ancestral anger with your entomber and trying to get value that way. You're happy just to cast your bears and go for it. Number 3, down 2.8%, is Reckless Impulse. So again, these mixed messages about what you're exactly supposed to be doing in Izzet. Is it this idea that you should be playing a super low curve and then mashing? Or is it like, hey, Reckless Impulse is bad, and instead you want Dreadlight Monstrosity? I definitely think it's the former, not the latter. And here's why. Because number 2, down 4.9%, is Wary Prisoner. And that's like the ultimate defensive card, right? If we're looking to prolong the game, then you just play this stupid big butt. Eventually it flips into a 6/6 and can start doing work for you. But 4.9% is significant. And then our number 1 overall down card, 9.1%, Lightning Wolf. I don't think that you're really hurting for relevant 4s. I think you'd much rather have Repository Scob, something you can get back cheap interaction, and sacrifice an Epicure or a Bearer that maybe isn't getting in like it once was. So yeah, Lightning Wolf was a little bit of a surprise to me. Next, we'll go to Orzhov. Up 2.1% is Nurturing Presence. This is a card I've been high on in Azorius, but it was interesting to see it show up here. I don't know really what you're expecting out of this because you're not super creature dense, but something to note. Number 4 up 2.9%, Heron of Hope. And this is a card that I feel like people are now getting it on. I think somebody called it a mini Baneslayer Angel when you have the Minister in play. Heron of Hope is exactly what you're trying to do, and it's your ideal 4-drop in Orzhov. Number 3, up 4.5%, is Mind Leech Ghoul. Mind Leech Ghoul? I don't get that at all. Maybe it speaks to you just needing 2-drops, but I'm not rushing out to go put a bunch of Mind Leech Ghouls in here. Maybe you're sacrificing your Nurturing Presence tokens to it. I don't know, but that might just speak to how badly you want to curve out. Number 2, up 4.7%, is Unholy Officiant. So this would make sense as the deck that could best use Unholy Officiant, as you're not trying to be super into blood synergies, you're more into life gain, and so you're going to just have extra mana laying around, but don't just go jamming a bunch of Unholy Officiants in there yet. Let's just wait. Let's wait a week. Can we make a deal on that? Can we agree we're going to wait a week on Unholy Officiant? If I'm wrong, feel free to tweet at me at FakeJakeBrown. And then number 1, up 6.5%, is Supernatural Rescue, which more reflects that it had a lowly 42% win rate opening weekend. It's not bonkers good. It's basically the difference between having raw turkey on Thanksgiving and then dry turkey on Thanksgiving. I'm not excited about eating dry turkey this week. On the downside for Orzhov, number 5, down 2.1%, is Perishblade Trainee. Your creatures just tend to be lower powered, but more lifelinky or ability based in Orzhov, so Trainee pairs terribly with them. At 4, down 3.1%, is Ceremonial Knife. This was a little surprising. I could see Knife being pretty good on those lifelinkers. I'm not convinced that this is correct, but might just not care about generating blood tokens, which would be consistent with what we're seeing from the data. Number 3, down 6.1%, pretty big, is Vampire's Kiss, and that's also tied with Honored Heirloom. Vampire's Kiss, I think people were just like, well, we need to gain life, and they started freaking out, and that's not the way you want to do it. It would also, again, reinforce the idea that blood isn't at its best here when incidental blood off of Knife and Kiss doesn't do it for you. Honored Heirloom, I don't think changes how you draft this deck at all. And then number 1, down 10.1%, is Adamant Will. I'm kind of surprised. That seemed like a lot. Down 10% Adamant Will. I'm not one of these people that's very hyped on Adamant Will. I think that there's a lot of ways to get around Indestructible in this format, but do with that information what you will. Rakdos, our big winner over the first week and a half. It's just been crushing out there. Cards that are up for it. Number 5, Up 1.8% is Ceremonial Knife. Of course, I think people initially were really low on Knife. This is the perfect deck for it. Go nuts, do the worm. Number 4, up 2% is Daybreak Combatants. And Daybreak Combatants, I was nervously optimistic on it. It felt kind of like Vampire Spawn, except you don't gain any life and it takes a little bit more work. But it also just, you sneak in damage in weird ways with it, where people think that they've stabilized. I've had this happen a couple times where they'll try and chip in for some damage and then all of a sudden they're facing down lethal. I don't think you want a ton of them because 3-drops are abundant in VOW, but something to note. Number 3, up 2.5% is Honored Heirloom. It's still only at 52% win rate, so don't go nuts for it. Number 2, up 3.9% is Pyre Spawn. This I don't get. I don't think that you should be putting Pyre Spawn in your deck. Just put a hold on that one. Put a pin in your spawn. And then finally, number 1, up 4% is Bloody Betrayal. We have already talked about Bloody Betrayal. Yeah, it makes sense. Again, it's just one of those cards the data tends to overrate. In terms of down, number 5, down 2.5%. Evolving Wilds. Maybe you just want to curve out pretty aggressively. You don't need lands coming into play tap. I don't think you need to do that much with this information. How about that? 4, down 2.8% is Reckless Impulse, which I don't know. Again, a little surprised with this. Probably more due to the fact that you're playing a slightly higher top end than maybe you want to be doing in Izzet decks, but I'm not convinced that Reckless Impulse is bad. Number 3, down 3.2% is Persistent Specimen, which, of course, it's only pretty good in Dimir, or maybe people were getting cheeky and thinking they could sacrifice Specimen to blood tokens for extra value, and then, wow, you get a 1/1, congrats. Number 2, down 3.6% is Fearful Villager, which, again, I'm like, what is happening with Fearful Villager? I think this might be the same thing as Boros, where it's not flipping as frequently, and a lot of other cards don't care about it being night. But I really liked the menace curve of Villager into the 3/3 menace into the Falconwrath Celebrants. Yeah, Bloodcrazed Socialite was the 4-drop. So I liked that curve, and they're not as big on it. Number 1, down 5.3% is Lightning Wolf. Again, I think we're just shipping Lightning Wolf. Being able to only get first strike at sorcery speed makes it kind of a dud. Shout out to everybody watching live that just got to watch me drink some water. And we're back. All right. Next up is Selesnya. And for our up cards, number 5, up 1.5%, Moldgraf Millipede. It's also tied with Sporeback Wolf. I don't think that's pertinent information. I don't think your Selesnya decks are really looking for Moldgraf Millipede. Maybe that just speaks to how creature dense you want this. But moving on, at 3, up 1.8%, we have Heron Blessed Geist. So I think that there are more of the do-nothing enchantments in Selesnya that you can take advantage of the Geist's exile ability from the graveyard. More likely than not, I think this deck just wants some reach. It wants to get there in the air, and the ground gets really clogged up when you're not training efficiently. So something to check out. Number 2, up 2.1%, is Witch's Web, a card that I've been really excited about as secret fight spell. You untap something, it does work for you. Your opponents have to play around it once they see it. Makes combat awkward. Big fan. And then number 1, up 4.1%, we have Nurturing Presence. So that might go back to speaking to what we were talking about with Moldgraf Millipede, where this deck just wants, 18 creatures. It wants to do its thing, play some tricks, and Nurturing Presence winds up being relevant. And it gets you a flyer, which may have some correlation with that Heron Blessed Geist info. All right, now on the downside, number 5, down 1.5%, we have this big cluster of Wolfstrike, Sporecrawler, and Snarling Wolf. Seems like mostly noise to me. I don't think these are necessarily bad cards, and 1.5% isn't like anything I'm massively stressing. So Wolf Strike in particular, I don't think you want to cut, and Crawler is an interesting card. If I'm noting anything, I'm noting that out of all of our down cards, we don't have a single human. So human might be way more important than I think it's getting credit for, and people just honed in on training as the keyword. Number 4, down 1.7%, is Massive Might, a card that I've really liked. This hurt. This was an affront to me. Massive Might is not a card I want to cut, but you might just not be getting as much value off of the trample, as your cards tend to be a little bit smaller, and I'm sure that you'd rather just buff them pre-combat, so if they are training, they can go to work. Number 3, down 2%, is Unholy Officiant. We're fine not playing Unholy Officiant again. Number 2, down 2%, is Evolving Wilds. Again, don't Evolving Wilds. It's fine if you don't. No one's going to blame you. No one's going to call you out on Twitter. You're not getting canceled for not playing Evolving Wilds. And then number 1, down 2.1%, we have Estwald Shield Basher. I think this was supposed to be one of the big training enablers. So that would make me very nervous about that theme. And if you're playing one, it's just so easy to answer efficiently. It's a 4-mana card that gets Flame Blessed bolted so easily in response to you activating the Indestructible. On to Simic. This is one of my favorite colors to look at so far because the data is really interesting. Up, we have at number 5, up 1.7%, is Spore Crawler. Makes tons of sense. This is a classic kind of mid-rangey value deck. At its core, you're excited to be getting that value. Number 4, up 2%, is Skywarp Scab. What this tells me is that self-mill isn't where you want to be at in Simic. That was the signpost uncommon. I think people were like, all right, let's dump it. We'll play our millipedes. And here, Scab's doing so well. Obviously, keeping creatures in your graveyard isn't so critical. On the flip side, you could look at it and say, yeah, I get a bunch of creatures into my graveyard, and then I Scab, and it feels good. But I don't buy that yet. The number 3, up 2.1%, is Scattered Thoughts. And this is pretty interesting to me because I think that this is at the core of what this deck wants to be doing, is taking time off. And you're playing a lot of the Meteor Wolves that want it to be night. So what are you going to do with all that mana you hold up? Well, these decks are playing a ton of counters. They are playing Scattered Thoughts, and they're almost Simic Flash without the flash. They're just trying to play instant speed, but there aren't a lot of creatures that they can necessarily do anything with. So they're holding up counter spells, and they're taking card advantage wherever they can get it. And Scattered Thoughts is the ideal card for a deck like that. Number 2, up 3.3%, is Snarling Wolf. Technically, number 2 is a Braid at 3.5%, but let's just not do that because, yeah, sure, if you want to splash a Braid, it's going to be great. But I think Snarling Wolf, again, would speak to that. We're fine having mana up. Okay, we've got mana up. Attack into our Wolf. It begins at 3/3. It punches way above its weight class. And then number 1, up 4.8%, is Cradle of Safety. Hey, it's a flash card. Interesting. So I'm fascinated to see, as this format develops, how people are building Simic and if they're doing it correctly. Down, number 5, down 2.7%, is Wanderlight Spirit. And Wanderlight Spirit is not a card that I would advocate playing. It's just skews more aggressive than you're actually looking for out of this deck. You want stuff that can answer an early threat on their side while you get to hold up mana, and this does that so poorly. Number 4, down 3.1%, is Witch's Web, which kind of surprised me. I'm not exactly sure about this one. Maybe it's just that your creatures should be decent enough blockers on their own. Number 3, down 3.4%, is Selhoff Entomber. I don't think that you're really trying to play Entombers. Again, you're not, self-mill isn't a theme, so you don't really care about a bunch of creatures getting into your grave. Number 2, down 4.6%, is Nature's Embrace. And I don't know, maybe you're just not trying to tap out. Tapping out seems bad in this deck on your main phase, and then just passing without any mana up. So something to consider. And then number 1, down a massive 9.9%, is Massive Might. I'm kind of bowled over by this. You might just be looking for enough raw advantage that cheap tricks aren't what you want to do. And if you're playing a certain number of counters, then you have to make cuts from somewhere. counters and card draw, so you're probably just not looking to have as many tricks and hoping to fill out those last few slots with some solid interaction. That is it for this edition of 5 Up, 5 Down here on Uncle Cardboard's Limited Jamboree. Thank you for no one telling me what a Limited Jamboree was. That was really rad. I appreciate everybody keeping it spoiler free out there. I also want to give some shout outs. I told everybody if they were one of the 6 initial listeners to this podcast that, hey, I don't have a Patreon. You don't have to give me any money. I'm going to give you a shout out. Luis Costa, Andrew Young, Sasha Coulter, Swagboy Tom Locke. Oh, I biffed it there, Tom. My bad. Ooh, Fire Shoes Robert Taylor. Thanks for checking it out. I sincerely appreciate you getting on board. I know that there aren't enough Magic podcasts, but thanks for making this one of yours. All right, we'll probably be back next week. God, I think the next episode will be another 5 Up, 5 Down, and then we'll have Open Draft Project after Thanksgiving. We're going to take just, a small respite. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, it's now available on every major podcasting platform. You can go to an iTunes, you can go to a Spotify, a Stitcher if you're still a Stitcher person. I'm not here to judge. And you can subscribe for free. I don't have any Patreon or anything like that. I'm doing it for the love of the game, folks. But you can check out all of my links at linktr.ee/Uncle Cardboard. It's Linktree, but you put a period before the E's and then you spell Uncle Cardboard. And there you can find my Twitch, Twitter, all that good stuff. And again, check out the YouTube check out the description for the YouTube link. There's nothing I am better at than landing the plane that is this show. This has been 5 Up, 5 Down on Uncle Cardboard's Limited Jamboree. I've been your host, Uncle Cardboard. I am just going to keep repeating that forever. Hey everybody, it's your favorite uncle, reminding you to check out the Open Draft Project, where I sit down with your favorite pros, streamers, and limited grinders. They do the exact same draft seed, and then we see what's going on in their heads. If you are brand new to draft, or you're like me and draft way too much, there's always something that you can take away from this series where we talk to some of the greatest draft minds in the world. Check it out.